The station was called Halcyon Reach, which in the oldest translation archive meant a place between storms. It hung in the void between two mapped systems, anchored not by gravity wells or orbital necessity, but by agreement. No empire claimed it. No banner flew above it. It existed because multiple powers had decided that it should exist, which was the closest thing the galaxy had to neutrality. For 3 standard weeks, its designation had circulated through every diplomatic channel that mattered. Educational networks replayed the announcement with careful narration. Analysts debated it in measured tones. Historians began drafting context for an event that had not yet fully happened, leaving blank sections where outcomes would eventually be written. Even religious institutions, slow to respond to anything that did not already fit their frameworks, had acknowledged the moment in language that suggested significance without committing to interpretation. First contact. Not the first discovery of intelligent life. That threshold had been crossed long ago. Not even the first integration of a new species into the Concord. But this one had a different weight to it, though no one could quite articulate why. The humans, as they called themselves, had arrived at the edge of mapped space quietly. No expansion campaigns. No territorial disputes. No early conflicts. Just signals, consistent and patient, followed by requests for dialogue that matched protocol with unusual precision. Everything about them, on paper, was correct. Seth Varon did not deal in paper. He stood at the observation gallery overlooking docking ring 3, hands resting lightly against the transparent barrier that separated atmosphere from vacuum. Below him, automated guidance lights traced slow arcs through the darkness, marking approach vectors for incoming vessels. The systems were running at standard efficiency. No fluctuations. No anomalies. Just the quiet hum of a station doing exactly what it had been designed to do. Seth was a xenobiologist by designation, though the term covered more ground than most people realized. He did not study anatomy in isolation. He studied behavior, pattern recognition, adaptive responses, the small things that revealed larger truths when observed over time. His role in this delegation was simple in description and complex in practice. Observe the humans, record what he saw, and provide interpretation that the diplomatic body could not generate on its own. He had reviewed the briefing files twice. Species classification, carbon-based, oxygen-breathing. Homeworld, temperate, high biodiversity index. Technological level, post-atmospheric, early interstellar capability. Political structure, fragmented historically, currently cooperative. Diplomatic posture, open, responsive, non-aggressive. It was, by every measurable standard, an ideal profile. He found that mildly unsatisfying. Below, a notification light shifted from amber to blue. Incoming vessel confirmed within visual range. Seth adjusted his stance slightly, not out of anticipation, but out of habit. Observation required stillness, but not rigidity. You watched best when your body was not distracting you. The ship appeared gradually, emerging from the dark not with drama, but with quiet certainty. It was smaller than most diplomatic transports Seth had seen, built with efficiency rather than presence in mind. Its exterior plating reflected the station lights in muted bands, revealing a design that favored function over display. There were no unnecessary protrusions, no decorative structures meant to signal status or power. Civilian classification, the file had said. Medical-grade life support. Cultural delegation vessel. All correct markings. Seth watched its approach path update in real time along the guidance grid. Angle, velocity, thruster output, each adjustment displayed in clean numerical precision. The docking algorithms compensated automatically, aligning the vessel with Ring 3's intake corridor. Everything was proceeding exactly as expected. He exhaled slowly, not realizing until that moment that he had been holding a small amount of breath. Not tension. Just attention. Around him, the observation gallery had begun to fill. Representatives from multiple Concord member species stood at measured distances from one another, maintaining the subtle spacing etiquette that emerged whenever unfamiliar parties shared a space. Conversations were quiet, controlled. No one wanted to be the one who disrupted the tone of the moment. Across the gallery, Senior Delegate Vorik conferred with 2 advisors, their voices low but steady. Vorik carried himself with the practiced composure of someone who had spent decades navigating uncertainty without showing it. His presence alone communicated reassurance, which was likely intentional. This was, after all, supposed to be straightforward. Seth shifted his focus back to the incoming vessel. The docking clamps extended from the station's outer ring, positioning themselves with mechanical precision. The ship adjusted its trajectory by a fraction, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it. Seth was watching. The vessel aligned. The clamps locked. A low, resonant sound traveled through the station's structure as the connection sealed, like a breath drawn in and held for just a moment longer than necessary before being released. Arrival complete. No alarms. No deviations. No complications. Seth remained where he was, hands still resting lightly against the barrier, eyes fixed on the sealed airlock below. In a few moments, the inner doors would cycle open. The first representatives of a new species would step into a shared space for the first time. He reached for his notebook, hesitated briefly, then opened it. There was nothing to write yet. That he suspected would not last. The airlock cycle began with a soft pressure shift that most of the gallery did not notice. Seth did. Inner seals disengaged. Atmospheric equalization. Status lights transitioned from red to green in a sequence so routine it bordered on invisible. The door opened. 9 humans stepped through. They did not hesitate. That, in itself, was not unusual. Briefing protocols encouraged confidence during first contact. Hesitation could be misinterpreted. Stillness could be read as uncertainty. Movement, therefore, was expected. But there were different kinds of movement. The lead figure, a woman older by visible markers, posture upright without effort, crossed the threshold first. Her pace was measured, neither slow nor hurried, each step placed with a consistency that suggested she had already walked this path before. She had not. Behind her, the others followed in pairs. Not formally. Not in a rigid formation that would signal hierarchy. Just paired. Balanced spacing. Equal intervals. No collisions, no adjustments, no moment where one had to compensate for another's position. Seth watched them the way he watched migrating patterns in unfamiliar species. There was no wasted motion. He lowered his gaze slightly, tracking foot placement across the polished docking floor. Most species, even highly trained ones, made minor corrections in unfamiliar environments, small shifts in stride, micro-adjustments in balance, subconscious reactions to new gravity tolerances or surface textures. The humans did not. Their steps were exact. Not mechanical. Not stiff. If anything, they appeared relaxed. But the relaxation had a structure to it, like a performance so well practiced it no longer looked like one. Seth opened his notebook. Movement efficient beyond environmental necessity. He paused, then added. Possible high baseline motor control. He did not underline it. The woman at the front, ambassador, if the files were correct, paused just inside the docking boundary as the receiving delegation approached. Her gaze moved across the gallery, not quickly, not scanning in the obvious way, but taking in the space in a sequence that felt ordered. Left to right, near to far. Faces, exits, structural points. Then she smiled. It was a good smile. Measured. Appropriate to the moment. Seth watched the timing of it. Not early. Not late. Exactly when it should happen. Behind her, one of the humans, listed in the manifest as a logistics coordinator, shifted his weight slightly, just enough to adjust his angle relative to the room. Seth followed the movement. The man's eyes moved once toward the far corridor. Once toward the secondary access hatch. Once toward the overhead maintenance walkway. 3 points. Seth glanced, almost reflexively, at the same locations. There were, in fact, 3 viable exit paths from the docking bay. He looked back at the human. The human was no longer looking at them. Instead, he stood with a neutral expression, attention apparently on the ongoing greetings. Seth wrote another line. Environmental awareness above casual baseline. He hesitated. Then, almost immediately, he added beneath it. Could be training. Do not overinterpret. He closed the notebook halfway, Not fully, leaving a finger between the pages. Across the floor, formal introductions had begun. Names exchanged. Titles confirmed. Translation systems engaged with only the slightest delay before synchronizing across both languages. Everything was functioning as intended. One of the younger humans, a junior attaché, if Seth recalled correctly, adjusted a small device at his ear while nodding along to the conversation. His expression was open, almost curious, as if he were absorbing everything with genuine interest. He seemed, Seth noted, entirely unremarkable. Another stood slightly behind him, hands loosely clasped, gaze steady but not intrusive. A medical officer, according to the file. Her posture was relaxed, shoulders low, breathing even. Too even? Seth watched for a moment longer. No visible fluctuation. No minor signs of stress response common during first contact scenarios, no microtension in the jaw, no subtle tightening around the eyes, no shift in breathing rhythm. It was possible, of course, that humans simply regulated stress differently. That was the rational explanation. Seth preferred rational explanations. Still, he wrote, baseline physiological calm during high-stakes interaction. Then, after a brief pause, verify with extended observation. The docking bay filled gradually with low conversation. Formalities transitioned into controlled dialogue. The expected rhythm of first contact began to establish itself, careful, deliberate, structured. Normal. Seth closed his notebook fully this time. For a moment he simply watched. The humans spoke when appropriate, listened when required. Their expressions aligned with the tone of each exchange. Nothing interrupted the flow. Nothing disrupted the balance. Everything was correct. That was, Seth realized, the only word that fit. Correct posture. Correct timing. Correct reactions. He had spent years observing species in unfamiliar contexts. There was always variance. Always a moment where something slipped slightly out of alignment. Too fast, too slow, too much, too little. Here, there was none. He found himself focusing again on the ambassador. She had shifted her stance slightly during conversation, redistributing her weight in a way that appeared casual. But the shift placed her at an angle where she could see both the primary corridor and the docking entrance without turning her head. Seth noticed that. He watched her hands. They rested lightly at her sides. Still, not rigid, not tense, just still. He held that observation for a second longer than necessary, then exhaled quietly and turned his attention back to the broader scene. There was nothing, he told himself, that could not be explained. Not yet. He did not open the notebook again. The first session was held 2 hours after docking in the station's central diplomatic chamber, a space designed with deliberate restraint. No symbols. No territorial markers. No visual cues that suggested ownership or hierarchy. The architects had removed everything that could imply imbalance and left only what was necessary. A long table, adaptable seating, and a translation system calibrated to uncomfortable precision. It worked on the first attempt. Seth had expected at least one delay. There was always a delay. There wasn't. The opening exchanges followed established protocol. Roles. Intent statements. Carefully constructed sentences designed to carry meaning without risk. Each word placed where it could do the least harm if misunderstood. The humans followed it perfectly. Not rigidly. Not like they were reciting. Just correctly. Seth sat along the observation line, slightly removed from the primary table, recording where necessary and watching where it mattered. The ambassador, Yaroi according to the manifest, spoke with a cadence that felt natural, though he was aware enough to question that assumption. Her tone adjusted subtly depending on the context of each response. Formal when required. Softer when appropriate. Never excessive. Across from her, Senior Delegate Vorik maintained the same measured balance. Two professionals establishing a shared rhythm. For the first 20 minutes, nothing deviated. Then the deviation happened. It was small. One of the human junior attaches, Danny, placed 3 objects on the table. Wrapped. Seth blinked once, processing. That was not part of the protocol. Vorik paused. Not long. Just enough for the moment to register without disrupting the flow of the room. Seth felt the shift ripple outward, attention recalibrating, expectations adjusting. The attaché spoke. "We weren't certain what would be appropriate," he said, his translated voice carrying minor imperfections that made it feel unpolished. "So we brought something from home." He glanced briefly at Ambassador Oe. She gave a small nod. Not permission. Not instruction. Just acknowledgement. Vorik reached for the first package. There was no tension in the room, not exactly. But there was awareness. This was unscripted. Which meant it mattered in a different way. The wrapping came away cleanly. Inside was a carved figure. Seth leaned slightly forward without realizing it. The object was small, easily held in one hand. Dark material, organic by appearance. The craftsmanship was precise, lines flowing naturally with the shape, the surface polished without losing its texture. An animal. For legs. Long neck. Balanced proportions that suggested both fragility and strength. Seth studied it for a moment before speaking. "What is this?" "A giraffe," Danny said almost immediately. "They're from our homeworld. Very tall. They eat from the tops of trees." He paused. "We like them," he added, after a second. "I'm not entirely sure why." There was a brief silence. Then someone on the Varith side, Seth wasn't sure who, made a sound that translated imperfectly but carried unmistakable amusement. It spread. Not loudly. Not disruptively. Just enough that the room shifted. Seth felt it happen. The tension, what little there had been, dissolved into something easier. He found himself smiling. He hadn't planned to. The second package contained a small device that produced sound when opened, a sequence of tones arranged in a pattern that repeated with slight variation. Music, Seth recognized, though the structure differed from Varith harmonic systems. The third held a sealed container of something aromatic. The scent, when briefly exposed, was sharp but not unpleasant. Complex. Difficult to categorize. "Food additive," Danny explained. "We use it in a lot of things." He seemed comfortable. Not performative. Just present. The session resumed after that, but something had changed. Not in structure. In atmosphere. The humans asked questions, not aggressively, not strategically, but with a kind of curiosity that felt unguarded. They listened closely to the answers. Followed up where appropriate. Allowed pauses without rushing to fill them. At one point, a Varith junior delegate fumbled with her water vessel, sending it rolling across the floor with a soft, hollow sound. Two humans moved at the same time. They both stopped halfway, looked at each other, then laughed. The delegate laughed too, a brief, relieved sound that didn't belong in a room like this and somehow made it better. For a few seconds, the chamber no longer felt like a site of first contact. It felt familiar. Seth noticed that. He noticed how quickly it had happened. How easily. Later, during a scheduled pause between sessions, Danny approached the observation area carrying one of the wrapped objects. "The carving," he said, holding it out slightly. "You asked about it earlier." Seth accepted it carefully. Up close, the detail was even more refined. The grain of the material followed the contours of the figure in a way that suggested intention beyond aesthetics. "It's well made," Seth said. 3 weeks, Danny replied. "That one specifically." "You made it?" Danny shook his head. "No. Someone back home did. But we chose it." He hesitated just briefly. Seemed like the right kind of thing to bring. Seth turned the figure slightly in his hand, studying it from another angle. "Why?" he asked. Danny considered that, then shrugged lightly. "It felt right," he said. There was no deeper explanation. None offered. Seth handed the carving back. "Thank you," he said. Danny nodded, smiled once more, and returned to the main chamber without any visible shift in pace. Seth remained where he was for a moment longer. Then he opened his notebook. He stared at the page. For several seconds, he didn't write anything. Then, slowly, he added a single line. "I find them easy to like." He paused. Then, beneath it, "Note this. The station ran its emergency drills on a fixed schedule. No exceptions. Not for diplomatic events. Not for visiting delegations. Not for first contact scenarios. The reasoning was simple. Emergencies did not adjust themselves for convenience, so preparation could not either. Seth had participated in 12 of these drills over his 2-year posting. They were predictable. 30 seconds of alarm. Lighting shift to amber. A recorded voice instructing non-essential personnel to proceed to designated muster points. Mild confusion, controlled movement, minor inefficiencies that were noted, logged, and corrected over time. Routine. On the second day of the human delegation's visit, the drill began at 14:22 station time. The alarm sounded. Contained. Familiar. The lighting shifted. Amber washed across the diplomatic chamber, flattening shadows and altering depth perception just enough to remind everyone that something had changed. The recorded voice followed. Attention! This is a scheduled emergency drill. All non-essential personnel proceed to assigned muster locations. Seth stood automatically. Around him, the Varith delegation responded as expected. Chairs shifted back. Documents gathered, some correctly, some not. One aide hesitated for a fraction too long before moving. Another turned in the wrong direction, corrected, and continued. Minor disruptions. Normal responses to controlled stress. Seth noted them without writing. Then he looked at the humans. They were already moving. Not quickly. That was the first thing he noticed. No sudden acceleration. No visible urgency. But their positions changed. Without signal. Without verbal coordination. The communications specialist stepped toward the wall panel, hands already aligned with the interface before she reached it. The logistics coordinator moved to the primary exit, not blocking it, not standing in it, but aligning himself beside it at an angle that gave him visibility down the corridor and into the room simultaneously. One of the junior attaches, Danny, shifted across the chamber, placing himself between 2 Varith delegates and the secondary access point. He did not touch them. He did not guide them. He simply occupied the space. The medical officer moved last. She positioned herself near the center of the room, where she could reach any point within 3 steps. Seth stood still. He had not intended to. He simply stopped. This was not a drill response. Not in the way he understood drills. There was no confusion. No overlap. No wasted motion. Each human occupied a position that made sense only if the scenario were not theoretical. 30 seconds. The alarm ended. The lighting returned to normal. The recorded voice confirmed completion. End of drill. Resume standard operations. The Varith side exhaled, some visibly, some not. A chair was righted. A document retrieved from the floor. Someone laughed softly, the kind of laugh that followed contained tension. Normal. Seth did not move. He was still looking at the humans. They returned to their seats. Not all at once. Not in sync. Individually. As if nothing had happened. Danny adjusted his earpiece again, glancing toward the table with a faint, almost distracted expression. The communications specialist stepped away from the panel, hands relaxed at her sides. The logistics coordinator shifted his stance, attention now apparently on the resumed session. The medical officer closed her kit. Seth had not seen her open it, and took her seat. Ambassador OAE had not moved. Not during the alarm. Not during the repositioning. Not during the return. She sat with her hands resting lightly on the table. Seth focused on them. Hands, in his experience, were unreliable. They revealed things the rest of the body concealed. Micro-tension. Reflexive tightening. Subtle tremors that occurred beneath conscious control. Even trained individuals showed it under sudden stimulus. Especially under sudden stimulus. Her hands were still. Not controlled still. Not held. Just still. Seth watched for a full second longer than was socially appropriate. Nothing changed. He lowered his gaze, opened his notebook and wrote. Emergency drill response, human delegation. He paused. Then continued. No visible stress indicators. Another pause. Movement pattern suggests prior operational familiarity. He hesitated, pen hovering just above the page. Then slowly, not consistent with civilian baseline. He stopped writing, looked at the words. then added, beneath them, possible explanation, training. He stared at that line. It did not resolve the observation. It only contained it. Seth closed the notebook. The session resumed. Voices returned to their measured cadence. Translation systems adjusted seamlessly. The structure of diplomacy reassembled itself as if nothing had interrupted it. Across the table, Danny made a quiet remark about the timing of the alarm, something about coincidence, that drew a brief, polite response from one of the Varith advisors. A small moment. Seth watched him. Watched the ease. Watched the way he leaned back slightly, posture relaxed, expression open. There was no trace of the positioning from 30 seconds earlier. No residue. No transition. As if the two states did not overlap. Seth felt something settle into place at the edge of his understanding. Not a conclusion. Not yet. Just a question. He did not write it down. Not immediately. Instead, he looked once more at Ambassador Oae's hands. They rested on the table, unmoved. And for the first time since the humans had arrived, Seth found that he could not explain what he was seeing with a single, clean line of reasoning. That, more than anything else, stayed with him. That evening, Seth did something he had not scheduled. He returned to the archive. He told himself it was routine, background research, contextual understanding. A xenobiologist's responsibility to expand baseline knowledge when encountering a new species. The explanation was clean, professionally valid. It was also incomplete. He accessed the Human Cultural Index first. Not military records. Not strategic files. That was where patterns revealed themselves without trying to hide. The archive opened with a structure similar to most Concord entries, categorized by era, region, medium. Literature, oral traditions, visual art, religious frameworks, educational systems. Seth selected mythology. It was a standard starting point. Early narratives often preserved the foundational instincts of a species in their least filtered form. He began reading. At first, nothing stood out. Creation stories, origin myths, accounts of natural forces interpreted through symbolic figures. Familiar structures expressed through unfamiliar forms. Then the pattern emerged. It did not announce itself. It accumulated. Conflict appeared. Not occasionally. Consistently. One story involved a war between divine entities that reshaped the world. Another described a hero defined not by what he built, but by what he survived in battle. A third centered on a conflict so significant that entire generations were measured in relation to it. Before, during, after. Seth paused, scrolled back, selected a different cultural region, different time period, different narrative system. Conflict again. Structured differently. Framed with different values. But present. Always present. He adjusted the filter parameters. Removed mythology. Selected early literature. Poetry. The oldest surviving human poems were not about harvests or seasons or the quiet continuity of life. They were about war. He read one translated passage twice, then a third time to confirm that the translation layer was not exaggerating tone. It was not. The language was precise, descriptive, focused not only on events, but on experience, movement, impact, consequence. Seth leaned back slightly in his chair. That, in itself, was not alarming. Many species recorded conflict in early literature. It was a common developmental stage. Societies preserved what disrupted them. He told himself that. Then he continued. He moved forward in time. Centuries passed in minutes as he scanned through index summaries. The pattern did not diminish. It evolved. Conflict became more structured, more organized, larger in scale, more efficiently documented. He opened the visual archive. Paintings, sculptures, preserved artifacts. The first image displayed was of a battlefield. Not abstract, not symbolic. Figures in motion, weapons raised, structures burning in the background. The next image, a monument. Not to peace, to victory. He adjusted the filter again. Museums. The human archive included entire categories dedicated to the preservation of objects used in conflict. Weapons, armor, uniforms, displayed with care, maintained over generations, visited. Seth stopped scrolling. He sat still for a moment, hands resting on the desk in front of him. He was not frightened. He noted that explicitly. This was data. Patterns within data. Nothing more. He reached for his notebook and wrote, Human Cultural Archive, high saturation of conflict representation across all historical periods and mediums. He paused, then added, conflict not isolated as anomaly. Another pause. Integrated as continuous subject. He underlined that last line once. Carefully. Then he continued reading. He accessed the religious index. He expected variation. He did not find absence. Even within frameworks centered on morality, transcendence, or existential meaning, conflict remained present. Not always glorified. Not always condemned. But acknowledged. Embedded. Sometimes central. Seth exhaled slowly. He became aware, distantly, that more time had passed than he intended. He checked the archive clock. 3 hours. He had not noticed. He closed the current file and opened another. Pre-contact communication records. Public. Accessible to all Concord researchers. 5 years of recorded exchanges between human representatives and Concord intermediaries. He scanned them sequentially. Tone, consistent. Polite. Responsive. Efficient. Every request answered within standard timeframes, often faster. Every protocol adjustment accepted without resistance. Every clarification addressed fully. They were, by all available evidence, easy to work with. Seth sat with that. He considered it carefully. Then he wrote, diplomatic behavior, cooperative to a degree exceeding baseline expectations. He did not underline it. Instead, he added beneath, no observable friction. He looked at that line. Something about it did not settle correctly. He tapped the pen once against the edge of the notebook. Then wrote, absence of friction does not necessarily indicate absence of force. He stopped. Read the line again. Did not cross it out. Did not expand on it. Just left it there. Seth leaned back in his chair and looked at the archive display without focusing on any single element. He thought about the drill, the movement, the positioning, the stillness of Ambassador Oae's hands. He thought about the cultural records, the persistence of conflict across every available medium. He thought about the communication logs, the ease, the consistency, the lack of resistance. He brought his hands together lightly, fingertips touching. A habit, a way of organizing thought without writing it. Then, after a moment, he opened the notebook again and added a final entry for the session. Question: what does cooperative behavior mean for a species whose baseline includes continuous preparation for conflict? He stared at the question. There was no immediate answer. He did not attempt to create one. Instead, he closed the notebook. The archive remained open in front of him, its interface unchanged, its data exactly as it had been before he started. Only his interpretation had shifted. Seth sat in the quiet of the research level for a while longer, listening to the distant, steady hum of the station systems. Everything was still functioning normally. The station remained stable. The delegation remained intact. The sessions were proceeding successfully. Nothing had gone wrong. He knew that. He could verify it. And yet, as he powered down the archive interface and stood to leave, Seth found himself carrying something with him that had not been there before. Not fear. Not certainty. Something less defined. A pressure. At the edge of understanding. He did not name it. Not yet. Seth did not sleep immediately. He lay in the narrow quarters assigned to research staff, lights dimmed to a low ambient glow calibrated for rest cycles, and replayed the archive in fragments rather than sequence. Not images. Patterns. The repetition was what stayed with him. Conflict, not as interruption, but as continuity. He turned onto his side, eyes open, focusing on nothing in particular. He had studied species with violent histories before. That, in itself, was not unusual. Evolution produced competition. Competition produced conflict. Conflict, when scaled, became war. But those histories had shape. Periods of escalation followed by exhaustion. Long recoveries. Cultural shifts toward avoidance. Entire generations defined by the absence of conflict because the memory of it remained too close, too heavy. There was a rhythm to it. Rise. He could not find that rhythm in the human record. He had looked for it. Specifically. Filtered for extended periods of peace. The archive returned results. But the classification language was different. The closest translation term was peacetime. He turned that word over in his mind. Peacetime. Not peace. A time defined by the absence of something else. A gap. A condition measured relative to conflict, not independent of it. Seth sat up slowly. The room adjusted lighting automatically, responding to his movement with a subtle increase in visibility. He reached for his notebook without thinking about it. Opened to the last page. Read the question he had written earlier. What does cooperative behavior mean for a species whose baseline includes continuous preparation for conflict? He added a new line beneath it. Follow-up, what does peace mean to such a species? He stopped there. The question did not feel complete. He tapped the pen lightly once against the page, then continued. If preparation never stops, does peace exist as a state, or only as an interval? He leaned back slightly in his chair. The answer, if there was one, did not present itself cleanly. Instead, another thought emerged. Not from the archive. From the drill. From the movement. From the stillness. He wrote again. Deterrence? He paused. That word had appeared in one of the cross-referenced entries he had skimmed but not fully explored. He turned back to the archive console and reactivated the interface. Search parameters adjusted. Term, deterrence. The results populated immediately. Multiple entries. Strategic doctrine. Historical applications. Philosophical analysis. He selected the primary definition. The text resolved in front of him. He read it once. Then again, more slowly. Deterrence, in its simplest form, was not about using force. It was about preventing its use. By making the cost of aggression so high, so certain, that no rational opponent would attempt it. Seth nodded once. That was logical. Efficient even. Conflict avoided through overwhelming consequence. He scrolled. Expanded sections. Case studies. The concept repeated across different human eras, adapted to different technological levels but retaining the same core principle. Capability. Visibility. Credibility. He stopped at a highlighted line. For deterrence to function, the capability must be real. Seth stared at the sentence. There was nothing ambiguous about it. No room for interpretation. The logic was direct. You did not need to use force. But you needed to have it. And the other side needed to believe that you would. He leaned back in his chair again, more slowly this time. The room was quiet. The station systems continued their steady, uninterrupted hum. Everything was functioning normally. He knew that. He could hear it. But the thought did not align with the data he had just read. He looked down at his notebook. At the lines he had written. Movement patterns. Lack of stress response. Cultural saturation of conflict. Diplomatic ease. He added another line. If deterrence is foundational, then presentation becomes strategy. He stopped. Considered that. Then continued more carefully. Question. What portion of observed behavior is genuine, and what portion is controlled display? He underlined controlled display once. Not heavily. Just enough to mark it. Seth closed the notebook halfway, resting his hand over the page. He thought about Ambassador OA. Her posture. Her timing. Her hands. Still. Not controlled. Not rigid. Just still. He replayed the drill in his mind. The movement of the delegation. The positioning. The lack of communication. He had seen coordinated responses before. Military units. Emergency teams. But those responses carried a different quality. Visible intent. Shared signals. Something. This had not. This had been immediate. As if the decision had already been made before the event occurred. Seth exhaled slowly. He realized, distantly, that his breathing had changed. Slightly shallower. He adjusted it consciously, restored a steady rhythm. Then, after a moment, he wrote one final line. If capability is hidden, how would it present itself under observation? He did not answer the question. He closed the notebook, turned off the archive. The room dimmed again. Seth lay back down, eyes open for several minutes before closing. Sleep came eventually. Not easily. Not deeply. And when it did not resolve the questions. It only paused them. The first reading appeared at 2:17 station time. No alert accompanied it. No escalation protocol triggered. It registered briefly at the outer edge of the station's long-range sensor array, just inside the threshold where detection became uncertainty. A mass signature. Indistinct. Then gone. The technician on duty, Oren, noticed it because there was nothing else to notice. Night cycles on Halcyon Reach were quiet by design. Traffic through the region was minimal. The station's position, suspended between two gravitational systems, made it inefficient as a transit route and ideal as a neutral ground. Nothing passed through unless it intended to. Oren leaned slightly closer to his console. He replayed the data sweep. The reading appeared again in the log. Timestamp confirmed. Duration, less than 2 seconds. No trajectory. No residual signature. He ran a diagnostic. All systems returned nominal. Array alignment, stable. Signal integrity, within acceptable variance. Oren sat back. He had been on this shift long enough to recognize noise when he saw it. Sensor drift happened. Background interference. Microdebris reflecting signal in unusual ways. It was not uncommon. He marked the entry accordingly. Possible interference. No follow-up. Then he moved on. 3 decks above, Seth slept. Not deeply. The kind of sleep that held awareness just beneath the surface, where thoughts continued without forming fully. He woke once, briefly, without knowing why. Lay still. Listened. The station's hum remained constant. He closed his eyes again. Elsewhere, the archive systems cycled into low-power mode. The diplomatic schedules for the next day finalized automatically. Environmental controls adjusted temperature gradients across inhabited sectors by fractional degrees. Everything continued. Exactly as expected. The second reading lasted longer. 11 seconds. It appeared during a routine sweep at 3:42. Different angle. Same outer range boundary. The technician on duty that cycle was not Oren. 2 operators sat at adjacent stations, monitoring parallel feeds. The anomaly appeared on both. One of them noticed first. Do you see that? The other leaned in. Range. Outer edge. No vector. They ran a cross-check. The system attempted to resolve position. For a moment, the display lagged, processing input that did not align cleanly with existing models. Then the data stabilized. Approximate location. 900,000 kilometers starboard of station. Far. Well beyond immediate threat radius. Also well within engagement range for any vessel equipped with long-range systems. The operators exchanged a glance. Not alarmed. Not yet. Just attentive. Repeat signal, one asked. Negative. The reading vanished. Cleanly. No decay. No trace. They ran diagnostics. Systems returned nominal. No calibration errors. No known interference patterns. One of them opened the incident log. Hesitated. Then typed. Transient mass reading. Dual array confirmation. No sustained contact. He flagged it for review. Priority, slow. The reasoning was simple. If it had been significant, it would still be there. It wasn't. The log entered the queue. Behind 17 other items. Morning arrived without disruption. The station resumed its operational rhythm. Delegations moved between scheduled sessions. Translation systems calibrated automatically. Food services adjusted output based on previous day consumption patterns. Seth woke, dressed, and reviewed his notes from the night before. The questions remained unresolved. He did not expect them to resolve quickly. That was not how this worked. Understanding, in his experience, accumulated. Piece by piece. Pattern by pattern. He closed the notebook and left his quarters. The corridor outside was quiet. Normal. He passed two station staff engaged in routine maintenance discussion. Their conversation carried the tone of ordinary concern. Timing, allocation, minor inefficiencies. Nothing unusual. Nothing urgent. In the diplomatic chamber, the humans arrived on time. Of course they did. Danny entered with the same easy posture, adjusting his earpiece as he took his place. The medical officer, Reyes, carried a small container that emitted a faint, unfamiliar scent. Ambassador Oy sat, hands resting lightly on the table. Seth took his position along the observation line. Opened his notebook. Wrote nothing. For a moment, everything aligned again. Protocol. Structure. Controlled interaction. The same measured rhythm as before. If there had been anomalies, they were not visible here. Not in this room. Not in this moment. Deep within the station's systems, the flagged report waited. Unreviewed. One entry among many. Time-stamped. Accurate. Ignored. Seth watched the session begin. Listened to the exchange of carefully chosen words. Observed posture, timing, reaction. Everything remained correct. He noted that again. Silently. And somewhere, at the edge of his awareness, not thought, not conclusion, just a faint, unformed impression. Something did not feel empty anymore. He could not have said why. There was no data to support it. No observation he could point to. Nothing he could write down. And yet, as he looked across the table at the human delegation, Seth found himself thinking, not consciously, not fully formed, that the space outside the station might not be as quiet as it appeared. The blackout began at 11:42. There was no warning, no flicker, no distortion, no gradual degradation of signal. One moment the station was connected. The next, it wasn't. Every external channel went silent at the exact same time. The indicator in the upper corner of the diplomatic display, small, usually ignored, shifted from active to null. Seth saw it before he understood it. The room paused. Not fully. Just enough for something to register without being named. Then the sound came. Not sharp like an explosion. Not violent. A pressure sound. Something impacting the outer hull with enough force to carry through the structure without breaking it. The floor beneath Seth's feet vibrated once. Then again. The second impact was harder. From a different direction. Somewhere deeper in the station. The alarm triggered. This was not the drill. There was no controlled cadence. No measured tone. The sound cut through the room, loud, insistent, wrong. Seth stood. This time, without hesitation. Around him, the Verith delegation broke formation. Chairs overturned. Documents dropped. One of the junior delegates turned in the wrong direction entirely, disoriented by the sudden loss of reference. Another froze. Completely. Eyes fixed on nothing. Seth reached for him, pulled him forward, toward the corridor. Movement. Find movement. That was the instinct. The room dissolved into motion. Not coordinated. Not structured. People moved because they needed to move. Because standing still was worse. Because the body understood danger before the mind could process it. Seth felt it fully now. The tightening in his chest. The sharp clarity of focus. The narrowing of options to a single question. Where is safe? He moved with the others toward the primary exit. He looked back. The human side of the room had not broken. It had separated. Not into chaos. Into positions. The communications specialist was already at the wall panel, hands moving with precision, not frantic, not searching, executing something Seth did not understand. The logistics coordinator stood at the doorway. Not blocking. Counting. His head moved once, tracking each person exiting. Ensuring none were missed. Reyes, the medical officer, had her kit open. Seth had not seen her retrieve it. It was simply prepared. Ready. Danny was gone. Seth scanned once. Found him. Ahead. Already in the corridor. Standing at the junction where the main evacuation route split. Directing. Not loudly. Not urgently. But with certainty. This way, he said, guiding a group that would have taken the wrong path. He knew the route. Not the public one. A different one. Seth felt something cold move through his thoughts. When did he learn that? There had been no time. No reason. No access. And yet, Danny stood there like someone who had memorized the station. Seth reached the corridor. The noise followed. More impacts. Closer now. The station groaned, not failing but strained. The kind of sound structures made when they were asked to absorb more than they were designed for. The emergency lighting shifted. Deeper amber. Shadows stretched. Movement accelerated. Seth stayed with the group, pushing forward. Breathing faster now. Controlled. But faster. The muster point doors sealed behind them as the last of the group entered. Internal systems kicked in. Reinforced bulkheads. Independent life support. Isolation protocols. The room filled quickly. Voices overlapped. Questions. No answers. Seth turned, scanning automatically. Counting. He didn't realize he was doing it until he reached the end. 43 Verith. 9 humans. All 9. He counted again. Still 9. No one missing. That shouldn't have been possible. Not with that movement. Not with that chaos. He had been there. He had seen it. Still, all accounted for. Seth stood near the wall, breath steadying, pulse still elevated. Across the room, Vorik spoke rapidly into the internal channel, coordinating with station command. Fragments of information filtered through. Communication blackout confirmed, external systems offline, hull impact localized to commercial wing, no full breach. A warning strike. Not destruction. Not yet. Seth turned. He looked for her. Ambassador Oi stood near the far side of the room. Not moving. Not speaking. Listening. Her head tilted slightly, receiving something through her earpiece. Her posture was unchanged. Her hands at her sides. Still. Completely still. Around her, the room carried the unmistakable shape of fear. Raised voices. Sharp movements. Uncertainty. She did not match it. She looked. Seth struggled for the word. Not calm. Not composed. Those implied effort. This did not. She looked unaffected. As if the situation, while inconvenient, did not require adjustment. As if the outcome had already been considered. Decided. Seth felt it then. Not fear. Not exactly. Something sharper. A realization forming too quickly to fully grasp. The humans were not reacting to the situation. They were operating inside it. Whatever this was, fit into something they already understood. Seth's gaze shifted across the group. Danny stood near the entrance now. Arms crossed. Breathing normal. Eyes on the door. Waiting. Not anxious. Not tense. Waiting. Seth's thoughts stalled for half a second. As if this part had always been expected. And for the first time since the alarm began, Seth stopped asking where the danger was coming from and started asking why the humans did not seem surprised by it. The CRE boarding party reached the diplomatic wing in under 8 minutes. Faster than station security projections allowed for a response. They moved in formation, 2 forward, 2 rear, 4 staggered behind, covering angles, minimizing exposure, advancing with the efficiency of repetition. They had done this before. Multiple times. That confidence showed in the way they entered each corridor. No hesitation, no wasted motion, no unnecessary checks beyond what the situation required. Professional. Certain. The first pair reached the junction outside the diplomatic chamber. Slowed. Checked corners. Advanced. The corridor ahead was empty. They moved. Behind them, the second group closed distance, maintaining spacing. 8 soldiers. Fully equipped. Fully prepared. They turned the final corner. And stopped. 2 humans stood in the corridor. Just 2. No visible weapons. No armor. No defensive positioning. They were simply... The lead CRE soldier raised his weapon. The command followed. Sharp, untranslated, carrying intent even without meaning. The humans did not respond. They moved. Seth saw only part of it. He stood at the edge of the muster point doorway, positioned where he could see down the corridor without fully exposing himself. Around him, Others had gathered in similar positions, drawn by the same instinct, to look, to understand. What he saw did not resolve cleanly. Motion. Too fast. Not chaotic. Precise. One human stepped forward. Not aggressively. Just enough. The CRE soldier adjusted. Too late. Not impact in the way Seth expected. Not force against force. Something else. A shift in position that placed the human inside the soldier's range. The soldier was no longer standing. Seth blinked. A second movement. Another soldier fell. The remaining 6 reacted, training overriding surprise, adjusting formation, raising weapons, recalibrating targets. It did not help. The corridor compressed into fragments of motion. Angles changed. Bodies moved. Not randomly. Not reactively. Deliberately. Seth could not track the sequence. His eyes followed one movement only to lose the next. By the time his focus stabilized, 4 seconds had passed. He knew because the internal timer display at the edge of the doorway had ticked forward exactly that amount. 4 CRE soldiers were on the floor. The other 4 had not crossed the threshold. They stopped. Not by choice. By outcome. The corridor was no longer open. The 2 humans stood where the engagement had ended. One of them, Danny, had a small cut above his eye. He touched it once. Looked at the blood on his fingers. Then wiped it away with the back of his hand. The other adjusted her sleeve. A tear along the fabric. She examined it briefly, expression unchanged, then let her arm fall back to her side. Behind them, the corridor was clear. No movement. No follow-up. Stillness. Seth realized he had stopped breathing. He inhaled sharply, air returning all at once. His mind attempted to reconstruct what he had seen. Sequence. There were pieces. Individual moments. But they did not connect. Not at the speed required. He knew, in abstract terms, that humans possessed combat training. That close-quarters engagement was part of their historical record. That physical capability, combined with positioning and timing, could produce rapid outcomes. He understood that. Conceptually. It did not account for what he had just witnessed. Not fully. Not cleanly. Beside him, someone made a sound, low, involuntary. Seth did not look away from the corridor. The 2 humans remained in place. Not pursuing. Not escalating. Waiting. Danny shifted his weight slightly, glancing once down the corridor where the remaining CRE soldiers had retreated. His posture was relaxed. Too relaxed. Seth struggled with the thought. As if the encounter had resolved exactly as expected. No surprise. No adjustment. Just completion. Behind Seth, the muster point remained tense. Voices hushed now. Movement reduced. Everyone listening. Watching. Trying to understand. Seth's gaze moved from the fallen soldiers to the 2 humans, and back again. He tried once more to make the math work. 8 trained soldiers. 2 unarmed individuals. For seconds. It did not balance. Not within any model he had. Not within anything he had studied. He felt something shift inside his understanding. Not a correction. A break. A realization forming too quickly to stabilize. The earlier observations aligned. The movement. The drill. The stillness. The arc. They were no longer separate. They connected. Not into a full answer. But into a shape. A pattern. Incomplete. But undeniable. Seth looked at Danny. The same person who had explained giraffes. Who had laughed at small mistakes. Who had adjusted his earpiece and asked casual questions. He was standing in a corridor where 8 soldiers had just failed to pass. And he did not look like someone who had done something extraordinary. He looked like someone for whom this was normal. And that, more than anything else, was the part Seth could not fit into anything he understood. The demand came at 12:31. Broadcast across every remaining channel still functioning inside the station. Unencrypted. Unambiguous. You have 60 seconds to signal compliance. Failure to respond will result in full structural engagement. The translation system rendered it cleanly. There was no nuance to interpret. No hidden meaning. just intent. Seth stood near the rear of the muster point, eyes fixed on the forward display. The external feed had returned, partially. Enough to see 12 ships, arranged in a wide arc around the station. Spacing precise. Coverage complete. He recognized the formation. Not from experience. From the archive. Containment envelope. Designed to prevent escape. Designed to ensure destruction. 40% shield capacity remained. No defensive fleet in range. No reinforcement signals. No response window. The station could not survive a sustained engagement. Seth knew that. Everyone in the room knew that. The air changed. Not physically, but perceptibly. The kind of silence that settled when outcomes narrowed. When probability collapsed into inevitability. Seth counted the ships again. 12. He did not know why he was counting. It would not change. Nothing would change. He looked at the humans. They had not moved. Not significantly. Same positions. Same spacing. Danny stood with his arms loosely crossed, no longer holding a cup, gaze steady on the display. Reyes stood beside him, medical kit closed at her feet. The logistics coordinator watched the formation with an expression that suggested confirmation rather than concern. Ambassador OAE stood at the front. Centered. Hands at her sides. Still. Seth watched her. The timer appeared on the display. 60 seconds. It began to count down. No one spoke. Not immediately. Vork moved first. Stepped forward, voice controlled but carrying the strain beneath it. "We are preparing a response," he said into the internal channel. He did not specify what kind. There wasn't one. Not a viable one. Seth watched the seconds pass. He became aware of his own breathing again. Measured. Deliberate. He forced it to remain steady. He looked back at the ships. Their positions did not shift. They did not need to. They had already achieved what they wanted. He felt it again. That pressure. The same one from earlier. At the edge of understanding. But closer now. Closer to resolution. Ambassador OAE moved. Just once. A small motion. She lifted her hand. Touched the earpiece. Listened. Her expression did not change. Not visibly. But something beneath it. Seth caught it. A fraction. A shift. Then it was gone. She lowered her hand. Looked at the display. Not the timer. The ships. As if she were confirming something already known. The timer reached 0. Nothing happened. 3 seconds passed. No impact. No escalation. The CRE ships held position. Seth frowned slightly. That was... The pattern did not match. The archive had been clear. They did not wait. They did not hesitate. He opened his mouth, then stopped. The sensor feed changed. Not gradually. All at once. New returns flooded the display. Mass signatures. Multiple. Large. Very large. Seth felt his focus narrow. The system struggled for a fraction of a second, processing, resolving, updating. Then the shapes appeared. 6. They were already there. Not arriving. Not approaching. Already present. Positioned beyond the CRE formation. Further out. Silent until now. Their outlines resolved slowly, as if the system itself required time to understand what it was seeing. Scale first. Then structure. Then designation. Seth's breath caught. He knew those specifications. He had seen them. In the archive. 40-year-old file. Retired class. Decommissioned. He had read the numbers. The mass. The capabilities. He had calculated. His thoughts stopped. They were real. All 6. Positioned in a configuration that mirrored the CRE formation. But larger. Wider. Complete. The CRE ships adjusted. Not dramatically. Just enough. A shift in alignment. Recognition. Too late. Seth looked at Ambassador OA. She had not moved. Not even now. Her hands rested at her sides. Still, he understood it then. Not all of it. Not the full system. But enough. The anomalies. The movement. The training. The culture. The deterrence. Not theory. Not history. Practice. Everything that had happened was not reaction. It was positioning. The diplomacy, the warmth, the ease. All real. None of it false. But not all of it complete. A presentation. Held steady. Until the moment it no longer needed to be. Seth felt something shift inside him. The question he had been building toward resolved. Not into a sentence, but into understanding. The humans had never been unprepared. They had never been vulnerable. They had never been alone. He looked at Danny. At the others. At the quiet, steady way they watched the display. Not relieved. Not surprised. Not reacting. Observing. As if the outcome had always been known. Seth turned back to the screen. 12 Series ships. 6 human vessels. Silence stretched across the void between them. Not empty. Not uncertain. Balanced. Then, for the first time since the crisis began, Seth realized something with absolute clarity. The humans had not come to this station hoping for peace. They had come, ensuring it. And they had done it. Without ever needing to say so. The display held. The formations remained. No shots fired. No further movement. The situation resolved. Not through action. Through certainty. Seth stood in the quiet aftermath, watching the shapes in the dark beyond the station. 6 ships that had not been there. Until they were. And behind him, in the stillness of the room, Ambassador Oi's hands did not move. Not once. Not even now. Because they had never needed to.